Have you ever walked into a room or a situation and just left completely changed by the experience? A few years ago I went rock climbing with some friends, and in the centre there was a labyrinth, and it was a series of small and tight tunnels, and you had to crawl through them in complete darkness. And before I went in, I was relatively fearless. I was young, I was bold, but when I got out I was so shaken to my core. I realised the fear of being trapped inside forever, and I've changed my perception of small spaces. Or what about this? If you're walking into a doctor's room and you're going for a regular checkup and you think, everything's going to be alright, I haven't shown any bad symptoms, but when you come out, the doctor's given you a life-changing diagnosis. He's given you an ultimatum. You need to change your lifestyle now or die early. Sometimes there's a confrontation that we need that will move us if we want life. What about this? You've known the gospel for a long time. You know Jesus' death and resurrection and what that means, but it doesn't seem to grip you or change you anymore. You're settled in your life. You've downplayed Jesus' radical words. You're a bit desensitized, to be honest. And life has gotten busy. You've put the gospel on the back burner and you continue living in a plateau. Does the gospel no longer grip you to change? Do you need to be confronted again with the gospel so you can find life in a way that will never move you back to live your old life? Because the gospel is a life redefining story. It puts us on a new course, a new trajectory. Today I want to ask 3 things. Are you living a redefined life? What does that look like? What truth do I need to be convicted of in order to be changed? And what power will guide me in my life? So today we're looking in 2 Corinthians 5:14 to 15. And if you want to know anything about a redefined life, Paul is just the best example to look at. We all know Paul moves from being a hater and a persecutor and a destroyer of Christians to being at the forefront of spreading the gospel at the cost of his own life. And not only that, but he moves from being prominent and well respected as a Pharisee to being barely escaping, always on the move, moving in and out of prison, suffering. He's thrown away his life, his religious career, and all worldliness. And the Corinthians that Paul is writing to, they know about Paul's life. But at this point, they're being influenced and won over by these false teachers. And these people distorted the word of God. They preached a different Jesus. However, they were very impressive. They were trained in their speech, they were eloquent, they had stature, and they were full of boasting and self-importance. And the Corinthians believed that was what made them legitimate. They had fallen for things that were worldly. In verse 13, Paul writes in response to this, "If we are out of our mind, as some say, it is for God. If we are in our right mind, it is for you." Paul is saying, if I'm living this crazy life, if I'm throwing it away, if I'm living in suffering and poverty, in hardship, in weakness, and look nothing like these false teachers, it's because I am genuinely living for God. I'm living sincerely for God, and I'm doing what He pleases. So genuine living for Jesus means foolishness to the world. How are you going following Paul's example? How are you going living a foolish life for Jesus? Does your sincerity in following Jesus result in you making sacrifices that confuse people and make your life questionable? Paul goes on to explain the heart of why he's able to live in this way. We read in verse 14 to 15, "For Christ's love compels us, because we are convinced that one died for all, and therefore all died. And He died for all, that those who live should no longer live for themselves, but for Him who died for them and was raised again." Notice that Paul begins by saying, Christ's love compels us. He's not doing it in his own strength. He's not running dry on his own ability. He is always depending on Christ's love. Do you ever feel like when you read a passage in the Bible and all you can pick out is all the things that you have to do? Like, I have to love more, I have to forgive, I have to be more patient. And you're trying to do it all in your own capacity and all in your own strength and willpower, but you can't do it. If this is you, will you fill up your tank right now with Christ's love for you? Can we remind ourselves of Christ's love? Because Paul never moves beyond that. Christ's love is beginning with us understanding the reality of who we were and where we were going before Jesus. We deserved eternal judgment, and that is justice. We were on the wrong side of justice. Christ's love is Jesus coming down from heaven and setting his face resolutely towards Jerusalem, knowing that he would have to die. Christ's love is enduring suffering, affliction, and beatings, mockery, and finally crucifixion, not for his gain, but for our gain. Christ's love is saying, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do, for dying for us while we were still sinners. Christ's love is Jesus becoming sin, so we could have his righteousness, able to be presented holy and blameless on the final day. In verse 14, Paul is convinced that this one truth changes everything. Jesus died for all, and therefore all died. So beneath the changed life that Paul lives is a conviction that Paul has owned for himself. Jesus died for the things that stand between us and God. We died to those things. And sometimes we think those things aren't linked together, but they really are. Jesus' sacrifice requires our own sacrifice. His death means my death to my old life. And the word convinced means to have rationalized, to have decided, to have judged. It's a picture of weighing up evidence and thinking about what they mean, then making a judgment or a conclusion. And for Paul, he has only one logical conclusion for Jesus' death for him. And it's non-debatable, it's non-preferential, it's not up to him. It is because Jesus died for me, therefore this must happen in me. Exercising regularly is something I've always struggled with. And while I agree that exercise is good for me, there's still a disconnect between what I say and what I do. And we can become so used to declaring a statement or a truth, but still not be living according to it. So while I agree exercise is good for me, there are actually a number of other beliefs that I don't believe. For example, I don't believe exercise is going to give me the results that I want in the time that I want. Or I don't believe that it's worth the effort or the sacrifice. And I think the same thing can happen. We can say, Jesus died for me, so I died to myself. But on a day-to-day basis, we struggle to believe whether Jesus is worth sacrificing the thing that I love, whether that sin is really that bad. Sometimes we think, oh, I can have both God and money. I want it both ways, but one will always be greater than the other. When I am not convinced, my life isn't shaped by the truth. Can you recognize the things that are holding you back from living according to that truth? That Jesus died and therefore all died. What things are you left still needing to be convinced of that will allow you to live in the reality of what Jesus has already accomplished for you? Paul says Christ's love is compelling. Compels is similar to the word urges, spurred on, pressed, moved, and in some translations, controlled or constrained. And I was a bit confused about why they would use those words. But when I thought about what compels looks like, I thought about ocean waves that are roaring about and being pushed into a small channel. Ocean waves actually carry a lot of energy that can be harnessed for something useful. And one of those methods is to bend ocean waves into a narrow channel, which then, because of the smaller area that the waves are in, it increases the wavelength of the waves, enabling it to move up a ramp into a reservoir, and then move down to power turbines to make electricity. And I thought, our life, our loves, our desires, they can be distracted and unfocused like ocean waves, tossing about. With energy that is useless, our life is futile. But Christ's love is the channel that directs us in a way that leads to fruitfulness and purpose. So Christ's love constrains us, not in the sense that it's withholding us from something, but it's directing us into giving everything into one. We have one purpose, one mission, one heart, because Jesus' death means we must live for him. So the question I'll leave you with is, what is it that compels you in your life? Does Christ's love compel you? How can that be your new reality? Let's keep challenging each other so we can be truly changed by Jesus.